You're 61 years old, married, and you've built up over $4 million of retirement savings. And you may be asking yourself the question, with $4 million of this money in 401ks, do Roth conversions matter to my situation? That's what we're going to look at in our video today. Hello, I'm John Vandergriff. I'm one of the owners and the wealth planning team lead here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, where we help people answer questions very much like this in the preparation or execution of a retirement plan. And so what we're going to look at today is a few components of what our normal conversations look at, but really drilling into the conversations of what things we need to consider with Roth conversions and whether you can kind of effectively age out of that or net worth out of that at some point. So as we look at this, the first question that we want to ask when it comes to Roth conversions, and it really is a fundamental question for any kind of financial planning decision, is what do you need your money to do? What do you need the money for? And so here's just three examples. The first could be that this needs to be an essential part of providing my lifestyle over the next few years, or maybe over the duration of my retirement. So if that's the case, you need to have some conversations to see if drawing that money out now versus drawing that money out later is a better chance for you to keep more of that money with you and hopefully preserve your lifestyle for a longer period of time. Inflation, let's say you've got your income covered between Social Security, pensions, or other income sources today, but you're worried about the longevity of these funds and adding to it as costs increase. Definitely you need to consider that, because tax increase will have a very similar impact to your money to inflation, because it's just a matter of you have more money that it takes to provide a certain level of lifestyle than it used to in the past. That's inflation. And then last but not least, let's say you're in a position where you've got all your needs met, you've saved this money, but you want to create an effective way to send it to the next generation. Legacy can be one of the most important conversations around Roth conversions, because I would argue Roth accounts are the best money to inherit, because it's the only money that exists today that has a tax-free life after a beneficiary receives it. So as we look at that, that's the first question. What do we need this money for? The second question will be, will your tax rate go up? Because as we look at this, and I'm going to show you a simple example in a second, if the tax rates go up, Roth conversions could make sense today. It's just a question of how much do you consider in that conversation. And when we look at this, the three ways that the government can impact your retirement savings and also your income taxation is really through three mechanisms. The first is the brackets themselves, the percentage that you pay of money on, or the income that you show as you progress, because we do have a progressive tax system. The higher your income gets, the higher those percentages can be. The government is in charge of what those percentages are long term. The government could also change deductions in a certain way to make it less advantageous for business owners, high net worth individuals, people that maybe are getting some good opportunities to deduct money today. They can tweak those and maybe eliminate those altogether, depending on what we're looking at. And then the last one is the least able to be predicted, and that is new taxes that they've not even thought of yet. We've seen a couple of proposals from the current administration that shows some leveraging and maybe some manipulation of rules toward higher net worth individuals with IRA funds, trying to come up with strategies of making them take additional required minimum distributions, or creating different systems for higher net worth IRAs altogether. So again, if some of those went into place, some of the things that we're looking at today could be a drop in the bucket compared to what those taxes could be later. So, but as we look at this, I've had lots of conversations with prospective clients, financial advisors, CPAs, all kinds of people about different opinions of what we need to consider when it comes to whether a Roth conversion makes sense or not. And so what I'm going to share with you is a simple example. And I've had some people in YouTube videos that say, well, these aren't the proper tax brackets. I understand that. This is meant to be an educational tool more than anything else, just so you can understand what you really need to be looking at when it comes to these conversations. So for simple numbers, I'm going to put up here $100,000. Let's assume that you have this money and you're trying to make a decision on whether it makes sense for it to continue its life in the 401k or an IRA, just a tax-deferred investment, or if it makes sense to migrate those funds over to a Roth IRA And again, these are decisions that we're having with people all the time. Which one makes sense for your particular situation? Well, we're going to look at both of these and kind of project into the future and see different paths here. But the first example is, what happens if we keep things the same? Well, obviously we're not paying taxes on this at this point, so that $100,000 stays the same. If you take that money and convert it over to $100,000, that's going to add $100,000 to your tax bill this year. And then you have the option of, where do you pay those taxes from? Well, let's assume that you don't have a lot of after-tax money, so you need to take a withholding here. And let's say you are in, the 22% tax bracket today. This pen is not liking me today. Then that means you're going to start this Roth account net of taxes at $78,000. And so people will look at this, a lot of advisors will use this as ammunition for their clients not to do conversions, because they'll say, if you do this, you will make less money. Now we want to dig into that a little bit, because if we're looking purely from a dollars return standpoint, that is true. If the market goes up the next year, this account's going to make $10,000, this account's going to make $7,800. But these are no longer the same buckets of money and no longer the same types of growth. This growth is fully taxable for some point in the future when you take it out. This growth, as long as you're over 59 and a half and have had a Roth account in place for at least 5 years, it doesn't matter when it was put in, if it was contribution or conversion, you're going to have tax-free access to that money if you meet those two criteria. So as we look at this, let's continue this example with these dollars only and say, what happens if we invest these in such a way where it doubles over time? So both of these buckets double. The IRA grows to $200,000. The Roth account grows, in this case, to $156,000. You know, the advisor's looking pretty smart to tell you not to do conversions at this point until you go to take this money out. And so let's assume, as we're in this picture here, we go to retirement at a time where you want to take distributions off your money. Well, it doesn't matter if you take $1 or the whole thing in this Roth, as long as it's been at least 5 years and you're over 59 and a half, you have this money at your disposal to do whatever you want to with. No tax impact at all. The 401k, though, it depends. It depends on the tax environment when you take it out. Now, what's interesting about this example is, let's say taxes never changed, which I don't think is very likely, but let's say they didn't change at all. We had the same 22% threshold there that we do in the beginning here. What you will notice is your effective cut of this $200,000 is actually the same as what you have in your Roth IRA. Because what matters in this discussion is, when can you pay the lowest tax percentage? That's the only thing that matters. People will throw rate of return, inflation, time. Truly, the only thing that matters on this money, assuming we're investing it the same way no matter what, is the rate that I can pay now versus the rate that I can pay later. And if they're the same, it doesn't matter. This is not, though, the way that most people position retirement. They'll say, oh, well, your taxes won't go up in retirement. In fact, they're going to go down. And using the tax brackets as they exist now, you know, some people will say, well, you won't be in the 22% bracket in retirement. You'll be in the 12% bracket. And if that were the case, then you're in a position where you are much better off, even though the Roth has been growing tax-free, to leave the money in a 401k and take it out at a time where the tax brackets are later. That's what a lot of the advice toward retirement has been built on. But the likelihood of this happening with our current environment, large amounts of debt, record levels of spending, our debt to GDP ratio is a significantly high level compared to where things have been in the past. I don't think that this is a huge likelihood for most of our clients. Now, obviously, we look at this on a one-on-one basis, but if that tax bracket climbs from 22% to, let's say, 30%, well, now you're in a position where you no longer have an advantage inside the 401k, because you're going to net out less money from this scenario than you would if you did that conversion at a lower tax percentage. So when we talk about tax planning, that's the main thing that we are trying to drive, and it's not exclusive to 401ks or IRAs. If we feel like capital gains are the lowest now that they're ever going to be, it could make sense to start migrating some of those and realizing those gains just to lock them in at a 0, 15, or 20%. But purely for our discussion today, we need to understand the thought process behind this so that we can see the impact here, because for many people, you may need less of your money in retirement. You know, you've got no debt, you've got less expense, no kids in the house. The problem is, if you're like this couple that we're looking at today, they're in a position where if they have $4 million today and then it continues to grow for another 14 years before the government makes them take money out, they could be in a position with RMDs that they are forced to take out more money than their lifestyle necessitates because of the way that the government has built required minimum distributions to not only have a fixed percentage the first year, but a growing percentage every year the rest of your life that you have to take from. So what we're looking at in this situation is a couple, 61-year-olds, retire now. They need $200,000 a year net for them to be able to live and operate. And so as we look at their assets, they've got $4 million in 401ks. They've got $150,000 in cash. And the key here for this example, and this is something that we talked through with people, this one is not taking Social Security until their full retirement age. Now, this is not always the recommendation, but when you start to think about tax planning and tax conversions, this particular couple is in a case where if they filed for Social Security at 62, they would eat up more of those lower brackets with dollars that are fully taxable. And as we said, you know, if they're in a position where I think we showed both of them being combined level of income from Social Security above $60,000, you know, if they filed at 62, let's call that $40,000 a year. Over that next 6 years, that's $240,000 less conversions that they could do at more attractive tax brackets. So we need to factor that into the planning conversations that we're having. And so sometimes the reason that we don't take Social Security is purely from a tax positioning standpoint more than anything else. If you're not trying to do tax planning, it could make sense to take Social Security earlier. It really just depends on the situation you're in. And so, you know, this is our kind of plan for everything board conversation that we try to walk through, where we look at your goals and objectives, how that impacts your income investments. And what we're going to do is really focus on our tax part of our discussion today. So with the couple, and again, we're assuming Tennessee here where we only have federal taxes. So their gross amount of money that they would need to satisfy a net income of $200,000 in retirement would be $235,000. That would put them in the top tax rate of 24%. And then as we look at this, they're currently positioned with $4 million in pre-tax, $150,000 in tax or after tax, $0 in tax-free, which is not uncommon for people to have a majority of their money in pre-tax money. But what we want to see is that money start to move down as it makes sense, looking at the tax rates now versus what those tax rates could be later. Because as we look at it, this is a couple where, you know, in 2024, as we look at it, their income growing above this 235 number, as we see here, puts them in the 24% bracket. And for them to stay in the 24% bracket, they could actually go up to $413,000 of income. So if they did conversions just at what their top tax rate is, that can make sense. And you say, well, John, that seems like a lot. Why would they consider doing that conversion? Well, if we look at the next situation, which is set to go in place January 1st of 2026, their $235,000, instead of top dollar being taxed at 24%, would actually be at 28%, and the 22 would be the 25, and the 12 would be the 15. So we're seeing, you know, incremental increases on those dollars as they increase, which means their effective tax rate on that is going to be more expensive than it is right now. So as we look at that, especially when you start to factor in Social Security into their future, we really want to be in a position where we try to create a time where they can pay the lowest effective tax rate possible, because with all the things that are going on today, I don't think incremental increases in these brackets are going to make a dent in the problems that we're facing today. There's going to have to be widespread tax change. And if we go back to a time where taxes are noticeably higher than what we've gotten used to recently, 1981 is the last time that we had really higher than a 50% top tax bracket. The top bracket was not 37 like it is today, but instead 70%. Notice here how many tax brackets, but also how quickly you progress to higher tax brackets compared to where we are now. And these are adjusted for inflation. So even though this 1981's bracket percentages, these are 2024 dollars. So how much money it took to get into each of those. But notice this couple, their top tax bracket would not be 24 or 28, but instead 49% when it came to the top dollar of income that they would show just for lifestyle purposes. So obviously they're going to be in a position where the combination of these brackets here are going to cause them to have a much higher effective tax rate. And unfortunately, what you see here is the escalation of those brackets getting to, like today, 24% is taxed at $413,000. You would cross that threshold once you get above, or really $71,000 of income, but that bracket, roughly what, $16,000 there would be taxed at 24, and then it would just continue to increase from there. So as we look at this is the type of stuff that we're trying to look at as far as where are we today, where can things go, and how does that affect the decisions that you need to make. Now, what I'm going to share with you is some projections, and what this will show is not 1981's tax brackets. It's really looking at the difference in current tax brackets now for 24, 25, and then January 1st forward of 26 having these tax brackets. So this is assuming, I think, a relatively conservative view when it comes to tax increase, but I would rather go with what we know instead of make up some things that we don't know. So as we look at this situation, this is showing, based on the parameters that we said, $200,000 net income, taking Social Security at full retirement age, and then this couple has a 75-25 split, 75% in the Russell 1000 Growth Index, 25% in the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index. This is not an investment recommendation. This is just for us to be able to see some numbers and actually look at the impacts that some amount of our allocations have. So as we notice here, their money grows over time. You see that, in a linear projection. We can look at different market conditions, but it shows that effectively, if we don't do any conversions, their plan may work. I mean, that's just what this looks like. So now what we want to do is see the impact of conversions on these dollars. So as we look at this, let's show a scenario where what happens if we make a decision to maximize the 24% tax bracket with conversions today, but also the 28% tax bracket between now and RMD time. And what we will see here is the difference, because what you're going to have in this particular scenario is a time where you've got a difference between the gray line represents what we started with. This represents making those conversions, and so you see a delta there, but then by the time that this couple is 88, you have basically a break-even point, and then you've got more money that's in your total bucket altogether by about $500,000. But what's interesting is, depending on the use case of these dollars, we're actually seeing a different makeup of what we've got in these buckets. Because if we do a comparison between what we started with and also changes with Roth conversions here, and the biggest difference here, as we look at it, we also need to talk about when we made the decision to do Roth conversions, instead of doing a 75-25 split, because there are no RMDs owed, we actually changed that to a 90% Russell 1000 growth and a 10% Barclays Aggregate Bond Index. So just because functionally you didn't have the need. But what's interesting with this tool is if we look at the tax type and the split between the different buckets of money that you have here, what you will notice is this couple has a majority of their money in tax-deferred money, not just today, but as time passes. And the biggest difference here is that you see this money really start to escalate in value once they get into their mid-70s, because that's the impact of RMDs. Even though they're not necessarily needing this money for lifestyle, they're forced to not only take that money out, but also pay taxes on it every year for the rest of their life. So they may get a stepped up cost basis whenever they pass here on this $1 million, but this $6 million going to their kids split two ways is going to leave them with, each having over $3 million of tax burden that they have to realize in the next, 10 years after death. If we go over here, notice that bucket is a little bit bigger, but because of the way that they have done conversions, but also continued to liquidate their tax deferred assets when they're in RMDs, they actually run out of tax-deferred dollars at their age 84, and you say that sounds bad. Well, no, they've got $5.8 million in tax-free dollars that they can access without any tax penalty whatsoever. And if they liquidate down their after-tax money, they're in a position where this bucket is growing entirely tax-free. And also, if legacy becomes important to them, this money is going to be split between their kids, divided 2 ways, and they're going to have an additional 10 years for a large majority of this money to be able to continue to grow tax-free. The beneficiaries will have to take required minimum distributions out of it, but those won't be taxable to them, and then anything else that stays in there will continue to grow tax-free. So as we look at this, we want to pay attention to the numbers, obviously. This is not estimating that taxes are going to double. If you did, almost noticeably you would have a much better position if you did conversions compared to where we are now. But this just gives us some conservative ways to look at what's happening in the investment world, but also how you can make decisions. And we can do this based on your individual situation. This is just a projection based on the scenario that we looked at. What we want to do is talk you through how this affects your life in retirement. And again, like we had shown, having a discussion with you about the parameters of your plan, what type of decisions do we need to make, but also the convergence of these things. Because I would argue, if you're only having a conversation about investments today, you're missing maybe 80% of the conversation that's going into retirement. All of these areas will have overlap with each other, and you need to be able to be aware of what that overlap is, but also take control of how those things are working together, hopefully moving in the same direction that you are with the goals that you have. So if you've not been able to have a conversation like this to really see if conversions or tax planning strategies can be beneficial to your situation or not, we would love to talk to you about that. If you look under this video, there's a link there that you can click to schedule a time with us here. We'd be happy to walk you through your situation, look at where you're at now, look at some of the impact of what RMDs could do to you in the future, and then also do some projections on what could happen with taxes, and again, how that would impact your family and the goals that you have. So with that said, thank you for spending some time with us today. Hopefully this was valuable for you. If you have some questions, please leave those in the comments below and we'll get back to you with some answers. And if you look forward to scheduling an appointment, we look forward to talking to you at that time as well to see if we can help. But continue to check with us. If you know somebody that's in a similar situation or just wanting to understand a little bit more about Roth conversions, share this video with them, subscribe to our channel so you can get more of this content. And thanks for spending some time, and hopefully you learned something today.